Not making an NBA All-Star team isn't always a sign that a player isn't good enough or doesn't have the right background. Usually, it's just a matter of bad timing. In this article, we'll look at the 10 top players who never made the NBA All-Star team. Situations can affect a player's chances of making his conference's NBA All-Star team. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, it was very hard for Eastern Conference shooting guards who weren't Michael Jordan, Reggie Miller, or Joe Dumars to make the NBA All-Star team. Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki, Chris Webber, and Rasheed Wallace were all great power forwards in the Western Conference in the early 2000s. However, they did not always make it to an NBA All-Star game. So, it's clear that an ASG pick isn't always based on how good a player is. So, let's take a look at the top 10 players whose absence from an All-Star team really stood out. Mike Bibby was the main playmaker for the exciting and dynamic Sacramento Kings, but he was never picked for an NBA All-Star game. Like many of the other players on this list, it was probably just a matter of bad timing and not a pattern of being left out. From a statistical point of view, Bibby was a good player in the NBA. From his first year as a pro in 1998 to 99 until 2006 to 2007, he averaged 16.8 points, 6 assists, and 44% shooting from the field and 37% shooting from three. In 2005 to 2006, when he averaged 21 points and 5 assists per game, it was his best season in the NBA. But Steve Nash, Tony Parker, Kobe Bryant, Tracy McGrady, and Ray Allen were guards on the Western Conference All-Star team that year, so Bibby didn't make it. Arvydas Sabonis may have started his NBA career at the wrong time. He was 31 years old and probably not at his best physically when the 1995 to 96 season began. Still, Sabonis was a good basketball player in the NBA, just like he was in Europe, where he was a superstar. The big Lithuanian man played in the NBA for 7 years, and on average, scored 12 points and grabbed 7 rebounds while shooting 50%. He had his best NBA season in 1997 to 98, when he averaged 16 points and 10 rebounds per game, numbers that made him an NBA All-Star. But in 1998, Shaquille O'Neal, David Robinson, Kevin Garnett, Karl Malone, and Tim Duncan were the big men on the Western Conference NBA All-Star team. Vin Baker of the Seattle Supersonics was the only player Sabonis could have beaten to get on that All-Star team, but Baker had better numbers than Sabonis, and Seattle was a top 2 seed in the West. Tony Kukoc won 3 NBA titles with Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. He was great when his team needed him, but he wasn't quite an NBA All-Star. In his 846 games in the NBA, Kukoc averaged 11.6 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. He started 259 of those 846 games. He won the NBA 6th Man of the Year award in 1995 to 96, when the Bulls won 72 games. However, his best season was 1998 to 99, when he averaged 8.8 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. During that cut-short NBA season, there was no All-Star game. Also, the Bulls were not a very good team, and after Jordan retired for the second time, they were no longer in the news. So Kukoc's chances of making All-Star were slim to begin with. Byron Scott played well for the LA Lakers in the 1980s, but he was never picked for an NBA All-Star game. Scott has been in the NBA since 1983 to 84, when he played for Arizona State. He averaged 16 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists per game, but he never made the All-Star team. His best season was 1987 to 88, when he averaged 21 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists in 81 games and shot 52% from the field. Those numbers were good enough for most players to make the NBA All-Star team, but the 1988 NBA champion LA Lakers already had Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and James Worthy, who were all NBA All-Stars. This made it hard for Scott to get on the team. Still, Scott probably should have been in the NBA All-Star team instead of Alvin Robertson, but the San Antonio Spurs guard got in despite having stats that were arguably worse than Scott's. The fact that Purvis Short is on this list doesn't mean that he was a better player than Tony Kukoc, Arvydas Sabonis, or Byron Scott, but his 1984-85 season with the struggling Golden State Warriors should have earned him an NBA All-Star spot. Short averaged 28 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game for the Warriors. Even though the Warriors only won 22 games that season, Short had a great year, but Adrian Dantley Brantley and Alex English, both of whom are in the Hall of Fame, played small forward for the West that year's NBA All-Star Game. Even though his career was short, he averaged 17 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists per game, and he shot 47% of the time. Ron Harper is known for winning 5 NBA titles with the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers from 1996 to 2001. However, he was almost a 25-5 player in the first 8 years of his career, even though his teams didn't do well during those years. Harper played 532 games for the Cleveland Cavaliers and the LA Clippers. In those games, he averaged 19 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists. With those numbers, he could have been an NBA All-Star. His best year was 1989 to 1990, when he first played for Cleveland and then was traded to the Clippers for Danny Ferry and Reggie Williams. He had an average of 22.8 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists per game during that season. But he didn't play in the NBA All-Star Game because the West guards included Magic Johnson, Clyde Drexler, John Stockton, Chris Mullin, Kevin Johnson, Fat Lever, and Rolando Blackman, among others. Rod Strickland was known for his creative moves around the basket and his skill as a dribbler. The talented point guard never made it to an NBA All-Star Game, though. During his 16-year career, Strickland's averages of 13 points and 7 assists per game were very good, and he had some great seasons when he was at his best. Between 1990 and 1999, when he was at his best, he averaged 16 points and 9 assists per game. He even led the league in assists in 1997 to 98, when he averaged 18 points, 10 assists, and 5 rebounds per game. But the Washington Wizards missed the NBA playoffs by just 1 game. The East Guards in the 1998 NBA All-Star Game were Michael Jordan, Penny Hardaway, Reggie Miller, Tim Hardaway, and Steve Smith. This meant that Strickland didn't make it, even though he had a good style and touch. From 1978 to 1982, when he played small forward, Cedric Maxwell averaged 16.5 points per game and shot 58% of the time. During that time, Maxwell was the most valuable player of the 1981 NBA Finals with the Boston Celtics. He led the team in both scoring and rebounding, averaging 18 points and 10 rebounds per game. Even though he did so well for a big team, he didn't make the NBA All-Star Game. Maxwell's best year in the NBA was his second, when he averaged 19 points and 10 rebounds per game and led the league in both field goals made, FG, and offensive rating, OR, with 58% and 121 respectively. A spot in the NBA All-Star Game could have happened, but it didn't. During that year, he probably should have been an NBA All-Star, but the timing wasn't right. Julius Erving and George Gervin were the best small forwards in the East at the time, and both played in the semifinals and made the NBA All-Star team. Most of the other small forwards at the NBA All-Star Game that year, like Bob Dandridge or Campy Russell, did better than Maxwell. He just wasn't ready at that time. That's it for today.